All right, let's get started. The next session of the summit, and this is one of my favourites. This is going to be a great session. I've known Troy Parsons for a long time now. We've been involved in different programs and other things, but I've talked him into being part of the summit. It wasn't a hard convince. He's a great guy. Troy Parsons, I'll do the formal introduction, Troy, and then we'll get to the real down and dirty story. Troy started working in Toowoomba, 2000, which for those international people is North Queensland. Or Queensland, for a podiatrist who was looking to retire. Driven and motivated to help people, he bought that practice in 2004. Since then, Troy and his business, The Podiatrist, have grown from 2 podiatrists to 9, 3 staff to 19, 1 full-time clinic to 3 full-time clinics, plus 16 sessional sites across Queensland's Darling Downs. And The Podiatrist is one of Queensland's largest and most successful podiatry clinics. He's also the director and co-founder of the Podiatry Hive, which we'll talk about today, which helps podiatry and business owners from around the world grow better businesses and live great lives. Troy, thanks for being part of the summit.
My pleasure, Paul. How you doing?
Mate, I'm doing great. Mate, give me the real story. I always launch my first question. I do the flowery introduction, and then I get to the real down and dirty bit. Take us through the real story of how you got involved in podiatry and how you grew the thing. Take us through your journey.
Look, podiatry was introduced to me through my own physical shortcomings. Basically, I was constantly injured, never finished the sporting season, and I was went and saw the doctor, went and saw the physio, went and saw the chiro. Mum stuck magnets all over me, did whatever she could to try and get me sorted out. And a bloke in a shoe shop one day said, "Look, he has got horrendous feet. He should really go see a podiatrist." And we had no idea what a podiatrist was at that point. But yeah, I went and saw a fella, and he changed my life. That was Greg Dower, actually, who I know you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, Greg was my introduction to podiatry. So yeah, I'd finished a degree in human movements, and then went overseas for about 12 months, came back and went straight into podiatry. And during the course of those 4 years, I initially thought I wanted to go and work in the public health sector. I was working at the Gold Coast Hospital at the time and doing a lot of stuff with wounds, and was very intrigued. But I know my parents had always been in business themselves, and I think I had this itch that I needed to scratch. And in my final year of my course, I went and saw the head of my course at the time, Alan Crawford, and said, "Look, where are the best podiatry practices around the place?" At that stage, I was working with Greg Dower, so I'd already seen one great practice firsthand. And one of the clinics he sent me to, because I wanted to see how the best were doing it, was a practice up in Toowoomba run by Joyce Cooper, who had a very successful practice. And went up here and I was in awe of what she had created. And I thought, geez, I'd love to work here. But at that stage, she had another senior full-time podiatrist, and there was no job offering. So I thought, went back and was considering my options, and I was very much looking like I was going to go work with Greg. However, then Joyce rang me one day and said, "Look, do you want a job?" I said, "I didn't think you had a job." She said, "Well, the guy who was working for me has actually gone and set up another clinic a kilometre down the road. So, we'd love for you to come join us." And I went, "Well, Toowoomba's not really my cup of tea. I grew up in the Gold Coast and lived, in Brisbane and been overseas. I thought, I don't want to go to Hicksville." So,
apologies to the Toowoomba people out there, by the way.
Well, at the time, I think it was probably an apt probably description that's certainly evolved since then. But look, she dangled the big carrot of, "Look, I'm looking to retire, and I'll give you first option to buy in 3 to 4 years." So long story short, packed up my stuff and moved to Toowoomba. So I bought this, started working at this practice, and had a very lengthy induction process of one day where she showed me around the clinic and got me to do a biomechanical assessment, take a plaster cast, and I saw 20 patients the next day, and just literally jumped in the deep end and started swimming like hell. And along the way, I was just had my eyes set on the prize of buying this practice, and we all geared up for that. In 2004, I actually bought the practice, and along the way, I was trying to learn what I could from them. And once, I was so excited as D-Day came across on that Friday. Monday, the practice was going to be mine, and I was just so excited about getting the practice, all the things I would do with it, all these great ideas. And I showed up on Monday, and so the practice was now mine. And what do you think changed that day, Paul?
Well, you were probably washing the floors. I reckon you were doing everything.
Well, mate, not a thing. Look, I was still, seeing my 20-odd patients a day, but now I was trying to run a business as well. Thankfully, Joyce was still around. However, as I thought back to uni and the length and depth of business education that I received, which was nil, I realised that I'd spent 4 years learning to be a podiatrist, but was arrogant enough to think that I could just buy a business and it would just run. And I actually realised it was really hard. And I wanted a business because I wanted more freedom, I wanted more money, I wanted more time, I wanted more autonomy. And I thought I'd pay less tax. Now, I know you and everyone listening realises that wasn't the case. And so I was no longer getting my 4 weeks paid holiday. I was no longer getting my paid super. I was no longer getting any of the things that I wanted. And then when I met with the accountant, he still told me I was going to pay 52 cents on the dollar at that stage in tax. I'm going, what do you mean? I got a business now. He said, yeah, but there's a thing called personal exertion. So when there's just you and one other person in the business, you can't get that company tax rate, which is what I was chasing. And so at that point, I realised I need to grow and get more podiatrists so I was less reliant on me. So that's when we started our journey of trying to grow the business and try to move forward. But, without going on too long, Paul, what I realised pretty soon is, I really was lacking in what it took to run a business. I had no concept of finances. I had no concept of systems. I had no concept of marketing. I had no concept of dealing with, staff at that stage. And, my only answer to trying to be successful and achieve the goals I wanted was to work harder and harder. So those 38-hour weeks, which I was doing with Joyce, became 48 hours weeks, which became 50, 60, 70. I think at one stage I was doing 80 odd hours a week. And, over time, Joyce retired, because as it happens, when someone takes over your baby and they don't look after it the same way you did, challenges arise. So it was in our both best interest that Joyce went her way after 12 months, hired my first pod, next year hired my second pod, year after that hired my third pod, and started a bunch of satellite sites because my only answer to my problems was growth. I had no concept of efficiency, systems, appropriate marketing, etc. And I just worked harder and harder and harder to the point where the harder I worked, the less money I seemed to have. And there was a watershed moment in my business where I was sitting in my practice on a Saturday morning and I was looking at my bank balance, which was in overdraft. I was looking at the pile of bills, the pending wages due that Thursday, and the gaps in my diary. And mate, it was a pretty lonesome experience sitting there with tears starting to form my eyes, thinking, this isn't what I dreamt of. This isn't what it's meant to be. And it would have absolutely broken my heart to let someone go, but that was the very real reality of where I was at that time. And basically I approached my bank manager that week and he extended my overdraft and wages were paid. And so I kept working harder, and I got to the stage where I couldn't work any harder, Paul, and everything I seemed to do, money was coming in, but it just seemed to go out so quickly. I just couldn't get it to stick. And, I was burning out. Benson Hedges and red wine and beer were my coping mechanism. And, I thought I was kind of hiding that pretty well, but apparently I wasn't. And, I just wanted to walk away, but I couldn't because I had so many people depending on me. I probably had a team of about 6 or 7 at that stage, all those patients depending on me. And so I couldn't walk away. So I thought, right, I'll sell it. I couldn't sell it because even though I had, probably 3 or 4 pods working for me at that point, I was still billing about 50% of what we were bringing in. It wasn't systemized. So there's no real asset to sell. And it was just good fortune that I met with a mate of mine one day who's an exercise physiologist and quite successful in his own right. And we're having a coffee and I was just explaining to him where I was at, and because he asked how I was. And in this moment of weakness, like the facade cracked and I could start to feel the tears kind of well in my eyes again, which, isn't the sort of thing that I would normally do. And he got this, I remember this smile crease his face, kind of like yours is now, which didn't feel very sympathetic or empathetic at the time. And he said, I'm thinking, what are you smiling at? Like, I'm hurting. And he said, I know someone who could help you. And like, I could have reached across the table and kissed him. And he said, and he introduced me to a guy by the name of Greg Gunther, who was a business coach, business consultant, and he introduced me to Greg. And long story short, I engaged Greg. He said he could help me. He wanted to help me, so we started working together. The only hurdle was it was going to cost me $33,000 a year for the honour, of which I didn't have because I was still in overdraft. But after Greg followed me up a couple of times. I found a way because I couldn't afford to do it, but I couldn't afford not to. And, having a consultant in my life and in my business life to help learn all the things I didn't know about business, helped me understand the psychology of business and helped me become the leader that my business actually needed. For many years, I blamed my team for not appreciating and understanding and working hard enough. When, once I actually got the realization that, through complete ownership, everything that was going wrong in that business was my fault. Mm. And once that was one of the defining moments of my life, and it took me a long time to get that. So over time,
it's very free. It's very freeing, mate, isn't it? When you finally realise it's all your fault, you stop blaming everyone. I remember happening to me. Someone arrived late for a shift and they didn't have a key to open the door and everything. And I'm blowing up and I just realised, that's my fault. I didn't fix the system. It's actually very freeing, I reckon.
Mate, absolutely. Because, if it's everyone else's fault, that's a lot of work to change everyone, right? If it's my fault, who's the easiest person to change? It's the hardest, but it's also the easiest. And mate, absolutely, it's an absolutely liberating mantra, and it's still to this day, everything's my fault.
And you also have a choice, which I like too. You can have a choice to fix it or not. You can decide if it's not right, then is it worth fixing, or I'll just keep putting up with it. At least you can decide as the owner whether you fix it or not.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful place to be.
Now, what? And people out there are going, okay. And this story, we hear it all the time in our field now of coaching and everything else. We hear the same story that you just explained to us. What were the big changes that you put into the business and take us through some of those changes? What turned it around for you from where you were then in despair to then being the success you are these days? I assume there was some turnover, but take us through what were the changes, the big leaks in the business that you fixed?